All right, that was Censor, and I'm joined today with writer and director Prano Bailey Bond for a chat about her terrific film Censor. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hope everyone
It's
enjoyed the film.
yeah, well, I know I did. So I'm fully obsessed with your aesthetic. A few years ago, you made a short film called Nasty, which we played here, and now you have which that film was also tied into the video Nasties in a very different way. But now we have Censor. So what is your obsession with video Nasties?
Well, it started with Censor. Like, people tend to think if you made a short first, then it's the short that grew into the feature. But it was actually started with Censor. It started with me sort of being fascinated by this role, like these people who sit in dark rooms and judge, the moral kind of compass of films, and that was really the starting point. And then I wanted to do something about a little boy around that period as well, around the video nasty period. But basically, I mean, in terms of the video nasties over here in the UK, it's just a really fascinating period where there was just like moral panic and social hysteria surrounding what were essentially like a bunch of, horror films on video that were going to like turn society into kind of murderers and, destroy our minds and things. And it's really interesting to be able to look back at that period in hindsight. We can sort of see like how some of those films are dated, and we see that it's sausages for intestines and things. So you're able to have that distance and look more at the reaction everybody had to the films, rather than like get caught up in the hysteria and the moral panic about what those films contained.
Well, over here in the States during the same time, we had the satanic panic craze going on. Heavy metal was going to be the downfall of our country. We weren't, we've never been as concerned about the gore. I mean, certainly there were certain films that were like, blacklisted, like Cannibal Holocaust and things like that. But yeah, it was definitely a fascinating time. And as a young person, I remember hearing about it and being like, what happened in the UK and during this crazy time? So Nasty, was that kind of, I mean, were you interested in this as a young person yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I always loved like dark films, basically. I was always into pretty violent stuff. And I think my family were all like, why does she want to watch that? She seems quite normal. So it's probably nothing to worry about. And like, I discovered The Evil Dead as a teenager because I grew up in Wales in the middle of nowhere during the 80s. So I wasn't kind of part of the video nasty, I was so young at that point. It was a very different experience to me, compared to like the characters in the film. But yeah, The Evil Dead was like, one of my favorite films growing up, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the ones that I was able to access. And then as I got older, I found ways to access some of the kind of, less well-known films, the ones that would never have reached me in the middle of nowhere in Wales.
Yeah, well, and the film does that in such a brilliant way that I'm like, there's no way you didn't live through, I think we're about the same age. So it's very evident that you lived through the video store craze, and that you knew the places where you can find, they had back rooms or under the counters and things like that, because we have that exact scene in this. It's like, give me this content. I guess you wanted to, you want to talk about your growing ups and the video stores and, finding these types of films?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in a really rural area, so like the local video shop was in this kind of tiny town. It was like a corridor, and it was run by this guy called Elved, because Elved's a Welsh name, and it was called Elved's. And actually, one time, one of the kind of first memories I have of being aware of censorship was off the back of renting a film from Elved's. We took it home and I put it on. I was probably like 8 and the film was a 12. And we put it on, and over here we had this introduction by a guy called Simon Bates, who introduced the like classification of every film on video, but I'd never seen him before. This was the first time. And he sat there all official at the beginning, and he said, it is an offence to rent this film to anybody under the age of 12, and something about being prosecuted. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get arrested for watching this. Like, my mum's going to go to jail. And I was completely terrified. Ran to my mum. She said, it's fine, you can watch it if you want to. And I watched it. The film itself didn't scare me because I knew it was made up. I knew it was fiction. But Simon Bates was very authoritative and real, and that was what scared me. And I think that was a thing that I always kind of looked back on, you know, that even as an 8-year-old, I could tell the difference between fiction and reality. You know, I got carried away with Simon Bates, but yeah, that was the strongest memory of the video shop and some of the films I got out from there.
You know, censorship and horror is always kind of gone hand in hand. Even, you know, we didn't really have the video nasties, but there's always been like, I mean, even today, there's still like a frowning upon with, you know, really gory, you know, or just that's what people think when they hear a horror film. It must be this just disgusting, absurd, you know, violent and nudity and all this stuff. But then, you know, the reality is a lot of times the films are catharsis. And I think your movie is really like, that's what I took away from it, is this like, you know, even a person who's day in and day out watching these films eventually finds this one thing that they put themselves into and can experience their own sense of catharsis and you know, connection to their own lives. And it's such a profound, I think, statement I assumed that you were making about that catharsis experience. Can we talk about, you know, the catharsis of horror and the catharsis of Enid?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's very much was the intention behind all of that in the film. I think, I mean, the thing for Enid is that her problem is impossible to solve in real life. And so I always imagined that in a way, in a kind of subconscious way to start off with, but a very conscious way towards the end, that she uses fiction to resolve that trauma in some way. And I actually think that that's something that we do both as film viewers and as filmmakers, that, you know, we can explore a fictional realm, you know, through horror, where we can kind of, you know, get rid of our demons or have an emotional catharsis, basically, that, yeah, purges basically our trauma. So yeah, absolutely. That's completely, you know, where I was coming from. And I guess for me, because Enid doesn't have the answers in reality, she's constructing a reality through a little bit of the films she's watching. She constructs that. She takes a bit of her dreams, she takes a bit of her memories, she takes a bit of reality, and she puts all of this together to try and find a conclusion for herself, whereby she can have some closure around what is like an ambiguous loss that she's never going to be able to solve in real life. So that was really fun to create. I think kind of my background in editing, you know, I enjoyed that part of the writing process where you're, you know, constructing a new reality, constructing a story from all these elements, which I think we sort of do a little bit in real life. Like, I don't believe that somebody watches a horror film or some kind of violent film and then goes, right, I'm going to go out and do that. You know, we don't do that, but there is a relationship between fiction and reality. I think, you know, we do get stuff from fiction and bring it into our own lives, but I think in a more positive way than was considered during the video nasty era.
Yeah, and I mean, it is. I mean, as I was watching, I was just like, you know, I've never seen somebody put that on screen. Really, you're really experiencing how art impacts somebody or a character. So we're watching art, and within the art is impacting a character, and the character's job is like, it's like shocking that I've never seen a movie that had a censor as a character, but it's so like, oh duh, that's like the most obvious character to do, but nobody's really done it. And Enid is such an interesting character because at the beginning, you know, it's just a job and she's seen everything, you know, and you know, there is a level of like at a certain part, you know, you can see the worst things ever, and then there's this one film that just shakes you and changes you, and whether that's like a spark, or in this case, you know, filling the gaps in this you know, past trauma, and I'm fortunate to deal with it. It's just such an interesting experience because we go really through that with her, and the final act of this movie is like, you know, it starts in reality, and then we get pure cinema and pure horror at the end, and you don't, you know, you put your foot all the way down on the gas at the end, which you know, a lot of movies might have kind of went the other way and tried to go maybe too artistic, but I think you balance it so well. I guess, is that go back to your pure love of wanting to really deliver on the horror, while also satisfying the brains of the film?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's funny because in my mind, there's nowhere else for Enid to end up. Like, I always imagine that she's going through the screen, you know, like we do. We go through the screen and into the video nasty world, because the film is about that relationship between the video nasty world and reality. So it always felt like that's where Enid should be, you know. So it was not, I can't imagine a more grounded ending for this film somehow. You want Enid to have that like release, because she's just this tightly coiled spring at the beginning. You know, she's kept it all in, and that we kind of embodied the idea of censorship within her character. Like, she's emotionally censored. She really holds everything inside. And so that gives you so far to go with her when she actually lets it all out, and it all comes out wrong because she hasn't worked out how to deal with all of this stuff. So it's a big splatter of feeling by the end.
Yeah, splatter, yeah, is a perfect word for it. I mean, it definitely turns into this, you know, we feel it creeping on throughout the whole film, and really for the middle of the movie, I'm like, oh, this is taking like an interesting kind of David Lynchian type of turn, and then it's like, oh, but you can't forget that you as a person purely loves horror and video nasties, and you know, really gets into that, you know, especially like Italian feeling of horror film. And when she enters into the world, it is just like such a visceral experience, that I can't wait for people to discover on the big screen, because that's like, I mean, it is so visceral. Yeah, I mean, congratulations on this ending, because it is just it's one that I rewound and watched the last, you know, 25 minutes again, because it's such a fun, like, you just don't expect it to go. You know, I think I turned to my girlfriend, I was like, this is, you know, I named a movie that I know she hasn't seen, but I was like, this is like this but a horror film. Which have you ever seen the film The Last Action Hero?
I actually haven't, no, but now I want to watch it.
It's nothing like your movie. Only in the sense that like a kid goes into the movie screen and ends up in the production he's watching. That's the only like element. But I'm like, this is the most, you know, it's not as literal as a kid going into the movie screen, but it is
great comparison. That's one no one's come up with so far.
I mean,
I mean, I'm a huge fan of like some of my inspirations were like Lucio Fulci is a big influence for me on the kind of video nasty world. I love his films. I just love the look of his films, and they're so much fun. And he's got this way of like taking you to like the netherworld, and you know, you think of the beyond and the ending of that film, and it's like so dark and amazing and otherworldly, and you know, so I don't know, I think he's slightly underrated. You know, I think he's an amazing filmmaker. But yeah, it was lots of fun creating all of that and being able to draw on those filmmakers whose work I love, and Argento, of course.
Yeah, I mean, so you answered my last question, which was going to be, are you Argento or Fulci? Because, you know, for the more mainstream fan, it's like, oh, this is kind of Suspiria-esque. But then for the Fulci fan, you're like, oh, well, this is very weird. And this is, you know, much more like, you know, Argento has the style, but Fulci has a little bit more, I think, going on upstairs, and is certainly underrated. So I get, are you more of a Fulci fan?
I love them both. I think for Censor, definitely I was leaning more towards Fulci, and I think because he's the underdog of the two, maybe I'd cheerlead him for that reason, because Argento gets a lot of attention, doesn't he? However, opera did slightly inspire the very ending of Censor, because I don't want to spoil opera for anyone, but when he gets arrested and then she's lying in the grass looking at the daisies and it's like la 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 la, I was like, wow, you know, you can go from that darkness to everything's fine. And I thought, you know, there was something quite like someone's taken too many antidepressants, you know, and they're now really fine. And that was like really some of the inspiration that came along for the very ending, the kind of, you know, post bloodshed glorious ending.
I'm glad you mentioned opera. So I, as an Argento fan, I had not seen opera until a year and a half ago. I had a misconception of what that movie was, and I watched it and I was like, oh no, I was horribly wrong about this film. It is top tier Argento.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great and it's nuts. Like that's the bonkers thing where he takes it at the very end. I think did he like, was it like a kind of fuck you to the execs? I mean, I need to go back and remember. That's what I've got, this vague memory of it being like this kind of fuck you ending. But
I could feel that. I mean, yeah, that would have been in his time, you know, that would have been like his peak, right? Like right in the mid 80s. So yeah, probably was a good fuck you. I mean, that also maybe was his last masterpiece. It is so good. It is unbelievably good. Are there any other picks, video nasty wise, that you're like, this is a big inspiration, or people should seek this one out?
I think there are some really great ones. Like there's one called Axe, which has another title, which is Lisa Lisa. And that's really eerie and not very well known. I think it was made on like $20,000 or something by a bunch of friends. And actually since making Censor, I watched The Witch Who Came from the Sea. Neither of them were on the Video Nasty ban list. They were kind of on the like prosecuted list or non-prosecuted list. But The Witch Who Came from the Sea, I think, is like actually like a super smart film that's like really elegantly made. It's fascinating. And then one of my favorite horrors of all time, which is not anything to do with Video Nasties, is Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which I recommend to everybody. If you want to watch something that's like teetering around, is she mad or is there something supernatural going on here? That is like, that's the dawn of that type of film.
I was so happy that finally got a proper release and a proper restoration, because that movie was criminally understated. And I had the pleasure of seeing it on a 16mm print that looked perfect about a decade ago with Rosemary's Baby. And I was like, that's a great double feature, but Let's Scare Jessica's to Death is, you can't explain that movie because it is an experience to go through that movie.
Totally. And there's no way, like, I would hate for anyone to remake it, because Zora Lampert's performance in it is like, that's what it, you know, it's one of those films that is, nobody could ever top her performance. She is Jessica, you know, no one else can ever be Jessica in my eyes.
Yeah, and it would just be done, they would play up the last quarter of the movie incorrectly, I think. And it is one of those masterpieces that I'm sure was made for, you know, less than $100,000 back in the 70s, and it's just such a fascinating movie. I'm so glad you give it a shout out. That is one of I think my top 10 of all time as well. Well, thank you so much for hanging out and chatting with us. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
I'm on Twitter at Prano Bailey Bond. Very original Twitter handle there. But yeah, that's where you can find me. But thank you so much. It's so cool hearing you talk about the film and the way you've kind of interpreted it as well. It's like, makes me very happy to hear it landing like that.
Well, I'm excited to be able to chat with everybody who's seen it now, because, you know, not everyone got to see it at Sundance, and it blew me away. And I'm like, I just can't wait to watch it again and watch it with people who love horror, because this is such a love letter, but it's also such a well-constructed film that it bridges the gap. So I'm very excited for you to introduce maybe not horror film or horror fans to this whole Video Nasties craze, which is so fascinating in and of itself. So thank you for gifting the world this film.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me and the film.